The morning greeted me with the familiar silence of home. I looked down at my hands, not as strong as they used to be, but still steady. The coffee in my favorite ceramic mug from my trip to Seattle wafted from the spacious kitchen of my two-story house in the quiet neighborhood of Pine Bluff. Outside the window, dawn was breaking, coloring the sky a soft pink. My 65 years had not broken my posture. I was still upright, with the sturdy build of a man used to an active lifestyle. The wrinkles on my face, especially around my eyes, betrayed my character, stubborn but good-natured. My gray hair was neatly trimmed, the only luxury I allowed myself on a regular basis when I visited Sam's old barbershop on Main Street. My kitchen was cozy and functional, quality appliances that were several years old, a good oak table, comfortable chairs, and a good set of dishes. On the wall hung a picture of me, my late wife Eleanor, and our young daughter Arlene on a picnic by the lake. Next to it were several shots of Arlene during her college graduation and at her wedding. I sipped my coffee and looked at the clock. 6:30. Time to get ready for work. Although many people my age had long since retired, I couldn't imagine my life without a job. I washed my cup, set it neatly on the shelf, and headed into the bedroom to change. My closet consisted of good but discreet clothes, good quality jeans, plaid shirts made of natural fabrics, and a few pairs of comfortable boots. No designer labels on prominent places, no frills. Once dressed, I walked out onto the well-maintained porch where my trusty 1996 Ford pickup was waiting for me. Not new, but in excellent condition, impeccably maintained and shined. "Good morning, Mr. Priest," my neighbor, Mrs. Green, who was walking her dachshund, called out to me. "Good morning, Martha," I nodded. "How's your arthritis?" "Oh, thank you for asking. After that prescription you recommended, I feel much better." The old lady smiled. I smiled back and got into the pickup. The engine started the first time, purring like a kitten. I always kept an eye on its condition. It wasn't about the money, it was just that I valued reliability and was used to this car. 20 minutes later, I parked near a modern two-story building in the business district of Pine Bluff. It had a modest but elegant sign on the front, Priest's Gastronomic Enterprise. There was nothing to suggest that this was the headquarters of a chain of 12 restaurants spread across 3 states. "Good morning, boss." Dorothy, my secretary of 18 years, greeted me. "Morning, Dot. Is there anything urgent?" I asked, heading toward my office. "The new restaurant in Little Rock called. The chef wants a meeting. Also, your daughter left a message asking me to call you back." I nodded and made my way to my office. Unlike the flashy offices of many businessmen, mine was functional and understated, a quality dark wood desk, a comfortable leather chair, several filing cabinets, and a modern computer that I used as needed. I started out 35 years ago with a small roadside cafe that I bought with the money I earned at the sawmill. For years I put most of the profits back into the business, opening new establishments, but never sought ostentatious wealth. After my wife died when Arlene was only 9, I focused on giving my daughter everything she needed, a good education, stability, support. Now that she was grown and starting her own life, I just continued to live the life I was comfortable with. No frills, but no deprivation either. The first thing I did was call my daughter. "Daddy," Arlene said excitedly, "I thought you'd call yesterday." "I'm sorry, honey. The meeting ran late. How are you?" There was always a warm note in my voice when I talked to my daughter. "I'm fine. Listen, I have an idea. Why don't we meet for lunch today? I'll be off at 1 o'clock. I looked at my day planner, meeting with suppliers, checking financials, nothing I couldn't put off for my daughter. Sure. Where should I meet you?" "That cafe near my school. You remember it?" "Of course I do," I grinned. "I own it." Arlene laughed. "You do? Sometimes I forget that my humble daddy is a restaurant magnate." I cringed at the word. "I'm not a tycoon, Arlene, just a man who does his own thing." All right. See you at 1 o'clock. I hung up the phone and got down to work. I personally reviewed every financial report, every menu, every decision to hire chefs. There were over 300 people working in my restaurants, and I knew almost everyone by name. At 1:30, I drove to the school where Arlene worked as a counselor. Jake's Cafe was across the street, a cozy place with excellent food, the first one I opened after the success of the roadside cafe. Arlene was already waiting for me at a table by the window. She looked just like her mother at 29, the same brown hair, the same lively eyes, the same smile. When she saw me, she waved. "You're not late," she said with a smile as I sat down across from her. "That's new. I always have time for you," I replied, studying my daughter. She looked happy, but there was something else in her eyes, a slight worry. "How are things going at school? The kids aren't bothering you too much?" "It's okay, Daddy. You know I love my job. How are your restaurants doing?" "Growing," I said simply. "I'm thinking of opening another one in Memphis." Arlene nodded, fiddling with her napkin. "Dad, I wanted to talk about something else. Tristan and I decided to have a family dinner Friday night at the Azure." I raised my eyebrows. Azure was the most expensive restaurant in town, specializing in seafood. Not my kind of restaurant, but a place I respected for the quality of the cuisine. "Sounds wonderful," I replied cautiously. "What's the occasion?" "Just family dinner. Tristan wants to get to know you better." I barely held back a skeptical smile. In the 6 months since we'd been married, Tristan had never once shown genuine interest in me. Our meetings had always been tense, with poorly concealed disdain on his part. "Of course I'll come," I agreed. "Just—" Arlene hesitated. "Why don't you wear that suit I gave you for Christmas? And come in my car. I can leave it at your place this afternoon." I frowned. What was wrong with my clothes and my pickup? Arlene sighed. "Nothing, Dad. It's just, you know how Tristan is. He puts a lot of importance on appearance." "I don't," I replied calmly. "I'll come as I am. If your husband doesn't like it, that's his problem." "Please, Dad," Arlene took my hand. "For my sake. I just want you two to get along." I softened. I was willing to do a lot for my daughter. "Okay," I gave in. "But I'm keeping the truck. I don't want you to have to go to the trouble of delivering the car." Arlene smiled with relief. "Thanks, Dad. Dinner's at 7 p.m. The rest of the dinner passed in easy conversation. Arlene talked about her students and her plans for the summer, but I sensed something was troubling her. Most likely, her relationship with her husband was not as serene as she tried to make it seem. After lunch, back in the office, I couldn't concentrate on work. Thoughts of the upcoming dinner and my son-in-law kept me busy. Finally, I decided to call my sister. Maeve Collingwood was 5 years older than me and had always been my closest friend and counselor, especially after my wife's death. "Maeve, it's me," I said when my sister answered the phone. "Hayden, what a nice surprise. What's wrong?" "What makes you think anything's wrong?" I grumbled. "Because you're calling during business hours. Usually you're sitting in your office with your nose buried in papers, oblivious to the existence of the phone." I sighed. Arlene had invited me to a family dinner with Tristan. "Oh," there was understanding in my sister's voice. "And how do you feel about that?" "She wants me to wear a suit and look presentable." Maeve snorted. "Of course, because her hubby thinks you're a poor redneck." Maeve. "What? It's true. He's been looking down on you ever since you first met. Remember how he reacted when he saw your pickup truck?" I remembered. Tristan had a look of disgust on his face, as if he'd seen a garbage can instead of a car. "He's young, ambitious," I tried to defend my son-in-law. "Status is important to him." "Authenticity is important to you," Maeve countered. "You could live in a mansion and drive a Mercedes, but you choose a comfortable house and a pickup truck you like, and that's your right." "I don't know, Maeve. Maybe I should tell Tristan about the business. Show him I'm not as easy as he thinks I am?" "Why?" My sister was outraged. So he'll start respecting you for your money and not for the kind of man you are. No, Hayden. Let him learn to see people as more than their bank account first. I sighed. My sister was right, as always. I'm just worried about Arlene, I admitted. I'm afraid she's picked the wrong person. When I got home after my conversation with my sister, I sat in my favorite chair for a long time, thinking about the dinner to come and about Tristan Murphy, my daughter's husband. Something about this young man had alarmed me from the start. I remembered our first meeting well. It was about a year ago. Arlene had called me, excited and happy, and told me she wanted me to meet a special person. We agreed to meet at a little Italian restaurant downtown, not my chain, but with great food. I arrived a little early in my usual clothes, jeans, plaid shirt, old but quality leather jacket. Arlene and Tristan showed up 10 minutes later. I immediately noticed how bright my daughter's eyes were, and it warmed my heart. But her companion, he looked flawless in his 32 years, an expensive suit, fancy glasses, a neat haircut. But something flickered in his eyes as he looked me over. Disappointment? Disdain? Dad, this is Tristan, Arlene introduced him proudly. Pleased to meet you, sir, he said, extending his hand to shake. His palm was soft, without a single callus. Likewise, I replied, shaking his hand firmly. During dinner, Tristan talked a lot about his job at the finance company, his growth prospects, and how much he was appreciated by his superiors. He used financial terms a lot, which I suppose was meant to impress me, or perhaps confuse me. Small detail, he never once asked about my job. As we said our goodbyes in the parking lot, Tristan couldn't hide a grimace when he saw my old pickup truck. "Is that what you drive?" he asked with ill-concealed surprise. 20 years, I said calmly. Never let me down. Interesting choice, he said, pointing to his brand-new BMW. It had been a long time since then. Tristan proposed to Arlene. They planned the wedding, got married. I tried to be there for her, to help, but the closer Tristan and I got to know each other, the colder our relationship became. I sighed and rubbed my eyes. Maybe I was being too hard on the guy. After all, he was making my daughter happy. At least, that's how it seemed to me. Lately, though, I'd noticed a shadow of worry in her eyes. I've been trying to build a relationship with my son-in-law. I invited him to go fishing. He declined, citing allergies. Offered to help with repairs on their new house. He said he'd hired professionals. I tried to talk about sports, politics, even his work, but each time I ran into a polite but impenetrable wall. One day I asked Arlene directly why her husband didn't seem to have any sympathy for me. "Dad, you're overreacting," she replied, avoiding my gaze. "Tristan is he's just different. He grew up in a family where everything was always the best, the most precious. He doesn't understand your lifestyle." "What's wrong with my way of life?" I asked then. Arlene hesitated. "Nothing. It's just. He thinks you could live a better life. He doesn't understand why a man would voluntarily choose to live modestly when he can afford more. I didn't bother telling my daughter at the time that her husband had no idea of my financial situation. For Tristan, appearances were more important than substance. If a man didn't demonstrate his success through expensive things, then he was a failure. Now, as I prepared for dinner at the Azure, I realized I was in for another round of silent condemnation. I opened my closet and pulled out the suit Arlene had given me last Christmas. It was dark blue, excellent quality, and it still had the tag I'd never worn it. It needed a new shirt. The next day, I stopped by the mall on my lunch break. A young saleswoman met me at the men's clothing store. "What can I do for you?" she asked with a professional smile. "I need a shirt to match a dark blue suit," I replied. "For dinner at a restaurant. What shade do you prefer? Maybe light blue or white?" she suggested, pointing to a rack of shirts. I chose light blue. It went well with the suit and didn't look too formal. "Good choice," the salesgirl approved. Would you like to try it on? I nodded and headed to the fitting room. The shirt fit well, but I wasn't used to seeing myself looking so formal. Looking in the mirror, I saw a successful businessman, not the Hayden priest I thought I was. As I paid for my purchase, I asked the saleswoman in passing, "Have you ever been to the Côte d'Azur?" "Oh, it's a wonderful place," she cheered up. "I was there for my wedding anniversary. It's expensive, of course, but the service is excellent." I nodded, picking up my shirt bag. The idea of dining at a place like that with Tristan was making me more and more uneasy. Back at the office, I decided to call Willard Fenwick, the manager of the Azure. We had known each other for years, even before I started my restaurant business. Willard was one of the few people who supported me in the beginning, shared supplier contacts, and gave me some valuable advice. "Willard Fenwick speaking." His clear voice came through the phone. "Hello, Willard. This is Hayden Priest." "Hayden, it's been a long time. To what do I owe this honor?" He sounded genuinely pleased. "Just calling to see how you're doing. It's been a while." "I'm doing great. The restaurant is thriving despite the competition. By the way, thanks for recommending that seafood vendor. The quality is excellent." "I'm glad I helped," I said sincerely. "Listen, I have a small favor to ask of you. Anything for an old friend. I'll be having dinner at your restaurant on Friday, a family reunion with my daughter and son-in-law." "That's great. I'll personally make sure you get the best table." "That's the thing, Willard. I'd rather you didn't pay me any special favors. You see, my brother-in-law doesn't know my, position in the restaurant business." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Hayden, are you still playing that game?" Willard sounded perplexed. "Hiding from everyone that you own one of the most successful restaurant chains in the tri-state area?" "Not from everyone," I countered. "Only from people who judge a man by the make of his watch and the model of his car." Willard laughed. "Okay, I get it. I'll act like you're just a regular visitor. But if your brother-in-law starts complaining about the service or the kitchen, I can't promise I'll hold back." "He won't," I assured him. "Azure is his choice. He wants to make an impression." "You?" Willard's voice was ironic, more like himself. We talked a little more about business, about new trends in the restaurant business, and then I said goodbye and hung up. I spent the rest of the week with the usual worries, meetings, reports, solving small and large problems in my restaurants. I tried not to think about the upcoming dinner, but my thoughts kept coming back to Tristan. What is he looking for? Recognition, respect, or just a chance to feel superior once again by belittling others? I didn't understand him, and frankly, I didn't try very hard to understand him. I was more concerned with whether my daughter was happy with him. The night before dinner, Arlene called me. "Dad, are we still on for tomorrow?" "Sure," I answered. 7 o'clock at the Azure. You'll, wearing a suit?" she asked cautiously. "Yes, and I even bought a new shirt," I assured her. "Thank you," she sounded relieved. "It's important to Tristan." "I know," I said softly. "Don't worry. After I talked to my daughter, I couldn't sleep for a long time. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about tomorrow night. Something told me that dinner would be difficult. But for Arlene's sake, I was willing to put up with any inconvenience, even the company of her pompous husband. I didn't know how the dinner would end, but I decided to behave myself no matter how Tristan behaved. After all, I had lived 65 years, built a successful business from scratch, and raised a beautiful daughter. I didn't need to prove anything, especially to a man who judged others by clothing brands and price tags. As I fell asleep, I thought about the fact that maybe tomorrow's dinner would give Tristan a chance to see me as more than just an old man with an outdated outlook on life. And if not, well, at least I'd know I'd tried. Friday came all too quickly. All day long I felt a slight uneasiness, though outwardly I remained my usual calm self. Dorothy even noticed it during our morning meeting. "You seem a little distracted today, boss," she said when I asked the same numbers for the third time. "Just a lot on my mind," I brushed it off. "Do you have anything important to do today?" Dinner with my daughter and son-in-law, I admitted reluctantly. Dorothy nodded understandingly. She was aware of my complicated relationship with Tristan. Good luck, she said sincerely. By 5 o'clock, I had finished all my urgent business and went home to change. My dark blue suit was waiting for me, hung neatly on the rack. I showered, shaved more thoroughly than usual, and put on a new shirt. I decided not to wear a tie, it would have been too much. Looking at myself in the mirror, I noted that I looked pretty good. The suit fit well, emphasizing that I was in good shape for my age. The only other question was what to drive. Arlene wanted me to take her car, but I decided to stay true to myself. My old pickup was a part of me, and if Tristan couldn't accept that, that was his problem, not mine. I left the house at 6:30. Azure was a 20-minute drive away, and I preferred to arrive a little early than be late. As I got behind the wheel of my trusty Ford, I felt the tension release a little. No matter what happens tonight, I'm going to be me. As I parked outside the restaurant, I noticed that my pickup truck looked a little out of place among the Lexus and Mercedes, but that didn't bother me at all. I adjusted my jacket and entered the elegant Azure building. The interior of the restaurant was marine-themed, muted blue-green colors, soft lighting, aquariums with exotic fish. Violin music poured quietly from the speakers. At the entrance stood a young female hostess in a strict suit. "Good evening, sir. Do you have a reservation?" she asked with a professional smile. "Good evening. I believe the reservation is in the name of Murphy." She checked the list and nodded. "Yes, a table for 3. Please follow me." Arlene and Tristan were already waiting for me. My daughter looked beautiful in an elegant dark green dress that emphasized the color of her eyes. Tristan was impeccable as always. Expensive suit, perfect haircut, gold cufflinks glittering in the light of the lamps. When Arlene saw me, she smiled and stood up to give me a hug. "Daddy, you're on time." "I'm always on time for important meetings," I replied, hugging her back. Tristan stood up as well and held out his hand. "Hayden, good to see you," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Likewise, Tristan," I replied, shaking his hand. We sat down at the table and the waiter immediately came over to take the drink order. "A bottle of your best red wine," Tristan said, not even looking at me or Arlene. "Actually, I'd prefer whiskey," I said softly. Tristan looked at me with mild irritation. "Whiskey from the supermarket, of course. How could I have forgotten?" "Tristan," Arlene said warningly. "What?" "I'm just kidding," he smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "Okay, 1 red wine, 1 whiskey, and a glass of white wine for my wife." The waiter nodded and left. "So Hayden," Tristan began, folding his hands in front of him, "how's your business?" He said the last word with an intonation like he wasn't sure if what I was doing was business. "I'm fine, thank you," I said calmly. "How are you doing financially?" It was the perfect question to steer the conversation in a direction where Tristan felt comfortable talking about himself. "Oh, we're in a hot time right now," he perked up. "I'm managing some big clients, working on a large investment portfolio. You know, last month my project generated a 6-figure profit for the company." "That's impressive," I nodded, though, in truth, such figures were commonplace for me. "Not everyone can boast of such results." Tristan gave me a meaningful look. "Especially at your age." Arlene looked increasingly tense, shifting her gaze from me to her husband and back again. "Dad's been thinking about expanding his business in Memphis lately," she said, trying to smooth over the awkwardness. "Really?" Tristan looked skeptical. "And how do you plan to finance this expansion? A bank loan?" "I have enough of my own money," I replied simply. Tristan grinned but didn't say anything because the waiter came back with our drinks. After we ordered, I chose steak, Arlene chose salmon, and Tristan chose some complicated French dish I couldn't remember the name of. The conversation returned to Tristan's work. "I've got my eye on a new car," he said, sipping his wine. "It's a late-model BMW with a full range of options." Your current car isn't that old, Arlene remarked. Honey, in my position, it's important to be up to par, Tristan explained condescendingly. Customers pay attention to such things. He turned his gaze back to me. By the way, Hayden, I notice you're still driving that old pickup truck. Have you thought about upgrading it? There are affordable models out there that look, decent. My pickup does its job just fine, I replied. Why change something that works? Maybe because some things get old, Tristan countered, like some approaches to business. I could feel the irritation building inside, but for Arlene's sake, I kept my cool. My approach to business is to provide a quality product and good service. That never gets old. It sounds nice, but in the real world, scale, innovation, ambition are important. Tristan made a broad gesture with his hand. That's why some people can afford to dine at places like this, and others. He didn't finish the sentence, but the look in his eyes spoke for him. Arlene looked like she was about to fall through the ground. I appreciate your opinion, Tristan, I said calmly. But success isn't just measured in money or status. Of course it is, he smiled indulgently. There's also moral satisfaction and all that. But between you and me, that's usually a consolation for those who couldn't achieve real success. I was ready to reply, but at that moment the waiter brought our dishes. As we ate, the conversation turned to more neutral topics: the weather, the news, the upcoming town festival. I noticed that Arlene gradually relaxed, and even Tristan became less sarcastic. After the main course, Tristan excused himself and headed for the restroom. As soon as he left, Arlene leaned over to me. I'm sorry, Dad, he's just nervous. Nervous? Why? I was surprised. There's trouble at the office. One of his projects is not as successful as he says. He's afraid of losing ground. I nodded, suddenly feeling something like sympathy for Tristan. Maybe his arrogance was just a defensive reaction? I don't take offense, sweetheart. Don't worry. Tristan returned and we ordered dessert. By this point, I was almost convinced that the evening wasn't as bad as I'd feared. But then Tristan decided to pick up where he'd left off. You know, Hayden, he said, cutting his chocolate cake, I've always admired people who can recognize when it's time to step aside and give way to the young. Perhaps you should think about selling your business, retire, enjoy a well-deserved vacation. Tristan! Arlene exclaimed indignantly. What? I'm just looking after your father's health, he replied innocently. At his age, the stress of running a business can be dangerous. I remained calm even though I was seething inside. Thanks for your concern, Tristan, but I'm in great shape, and my business brings me pleasure, not stress. Of course it does, he smiled indulgently. But you have to admit, a small roadside cafe is hardly comparable to what I do. The responsibility, the scale, the risks. At that moment, a tall, elegantly dressed middle-aged man approached our table. I recognized Willard Fenwick immediately. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, he said with a professional smile. I hope you're enjoying yourselves. Everything is excellent, Tristan replied with the tone of voice that rich people used when speaking to the staff. Polite, but with a touch of superiority. Willard nodded, and then his gaze settled on me. I saw his eyes widen with surprise. Oh my God, Hayden Priest, he exclaimed. What an honor for us. Tristan looked at Willard, then at me. Do you two know each other? He asked with slight disbelief. Do I know you? Willard laughed. Mr. Priest is a legend in the restaurant business, one of the most successful restaurateurs in the tri-state area. I saw Tristan's face stretch in surprise. I have to admit, Willard continued, not noticing my son-in-law's growing confusion, we learned a lot of our supplier practices from Mr. Priest's chain of restaurants. His quality control system is the benchmark in the industry. Tristan shifted his gaze from Willard to me and back again, clearly not understanding what was going on. Are you talking about some other Hayden Priest? He finally squeezed out. What other Hayden Priest? Willard wondered. The founder and owner of Priest Gastronomic Enterprises, of course. 12 restaurants in 3 states, and that's just the beginning, as far as I know. The fork fell out of Tristan's hand and clattered against the plate. 12 restaurants? He muttered, looking at me with wide eyes. I kept my composure, though I had mixed feelings inside. On the one hand, the look on Tristan's face gave me a certain satisfaction. On the other, I didn't want to humiliate him, especially in front of Arlene. Willard is exaggerating, I said modestly. But yes, I own a chain of restaurants. Exaggerating? Willard laughed. Hayden had always been modest. His business is worth millions, but he still drives an old pickup truck and lives in the same house where he raised his daughter. Now that's what I call real character. Tristan looked like he'd been kicked in the butt. He opened his mouth to say something but couldn't utter a word. Arlene put her hand on her husband's shoulder. "Tristan, are you all right?" she asked with a poorly concealed smile. "Yeah, I don't understand," he finally said. "You own a chain of restaurants? Why didn't you ever talk about it?" "You never asked," I said simply. "You were too busy talking about your accomplishments." Willard, finally noticing the awkwardness of the situation, tactfully stepped back. "I'll leave you to it. Dessert is on the house in honor of Mr. Priest's visit." When he left, there was a heavy silence at the table. Tristan looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. His face was flushed, whether from embarrassment or anger I couldn't tell. "All this time," he started, but he couldn't finish the sentence. "I've been the same person all this time," I said calmly. "It's just that you only saw what you wanted to see." Tristan lowered his eyes, clearly not knowing what to say. Arlene looked at him with an expression that said, "I told you so." "But why do you live your life so simple?" Tristan finally asked. "Why do you drive an old pickup truck when you can afford any car you want?" "Because I like it," I answered. "Because I value things for their reliability and convenience, not for the tag or the status they might confer." Tristan was silent, digesting the information. I watched the emotions change in his eyes: shock, disbelief, confusion, and finally, something resembling respect. I guess there's a lot I didn't know about you," he said at last. "Didn't know much, or didn't want to know much?" I asked softly. Tristan sat across from me as if he'd suddenly discovered that the earth was flat, not round like he'd always thought. His eyes darted between Arlene and me, trying to make sense of this new reality. "I don't understand," he finally said, nervously adjusting his shirt collar. "If you, the owner of a chain of restaurants, why did you hide it?" "I wasn't hiding anything," I said calmly, sipping my whiskey. "I just don't advertise it." "But why?" Tristan sounded genuinely perplexed. "Anyone else in your place?" "I'm not anyone else," I interrupted gently. "I've never believed that a man is defined by the size of his bank account or the make of his car." Arlene put her hand on her husband's shoulder. "Tristan, I've tried to explain to you that my father is a special man, but you were so sure you knew everything about him just by looking at his pickup truck." "Did you?" Tristan turned to his wife with an expression of slight betrayal on his face. "All this time, you knew your father was rich?" Arlene sighed. "Of course I did. I grew up watching him build his business, but I also respected his choice to live modestly and not shout his success on every corner." Tristan shook his head, still trying to fit the new information into his worldview. "But why?" He looked at me again. "Why live like you have nothing, when in reality—" I set my fork aside and looked straight into my brother-in-law's eyes. "Tristan, I had nothing when I started. I grew up in a logging family working in a sawmill from the age of 16 to help my parents. I know what real poverty is, and I know that money doesn't make a person happier or better." I paused, gathering my thoughts. When I opened my first cafe, it was a tiny roadside restaurant with 4 tables and a prehistoric kitchen. I was the cook, the waiter, the cleaner. I put every penny of profit back into the business. Not because I wanted to get rich, but because I loved what I did. Tristan listened with growing interest. For the first time since we'd met, I saw curiosity in his eyes, not disdain. When Arlene was born, I knew I wanted to give her a future, but I also wanted to teach her the value of hard work, to respect people regardless of their position, to understand what was really important in life. Arlene smiled, her eyes filled with warmth. "And you succeeded, Daddy." Then, when Eleanor died, I paused, feeling the familiar ache at the mention of my late wife. A lot of things lost their meaning. The money, the status, the recognition, it all seemed so empty. I just kept doing what I knew how to do, running restaurants, taking care of my daughter. I sipped another sip of whiskey. The business was growing because I was putting my heart into it, not because I was chasing profits. And at some point I realized that it had become a real success. But by then I was used to the simple life and saw no reason to change it. Tristan shook his head, but now there was something like respect in his gaze. "But you could have, I don't know, live in a mansion, drive a Rolls-Royce, travel the world." "And what would that change?" I asked. "Would it make me a better father? A better businessman? A better man?" Tristan couldn't come up with an answer. "I'm not against luxury," I continued. "I just don't see the point of it if it doesn't make you happier. My house is comfortable, my car is reliable, my clothes are good. What more do you need?" At that moment, Willard came to our table, interrupting our conversation. "I hope everything is all right?" he asked, looking at our faces with obvious interest. "Everything's fine, Willard," I replied. "The dessert is excellent." "Glad to hear it. By the way, Hayden, I wanted to ask your opinion on the new seafood vendor. Their shrimp is amazing, but their prices—" "Send me their contacts and I'll look into it." I nodded. Willard turned to Tristan and Arlene. "You're lucky to have a father-in-law, young man. Half the restaurateurs in this town dream of getting advice from Hayden Priest. They study his management techniques in business school." Tristan looked like he'd been kicked in the butt again. "Really?" he muttered. "You bet," Willard exclaimed. "A threefold increase in business in 5 years in a recession is no joke. And his approach to human resources management is a story of its own. He has the lowest employee turnover in the industry." When Willard finally left, Tristan was silent for a while, twirling his wine glass in his hands. "Yeah, I don't know what to say," he finally said. "All this time I've been thinking—" "That I'm a loser?" I asked without resentment. "Well, looks can be deceiving." "But then why did you agree to this dinner?" Tristan suddenly asked. "Why let me act so arrogant when you knew the truth all along?" I looked at Arlene, then back at Tristan. "Because you're my daughter's husband, and I care that she's happy. I hoped we could find common ground despite our differences." Tristan lowered his eyes, clearly embarrassed. "I was being a jerk," he admitted quietly. "It happens," I replied magnanimously. "Everyone has weaknesses. But now that I know you're actually a successful businessman—" I raised my hand, stopping him. "Tristan, if you start respecting me just because you found out about my financial situation, then you haven't understood anything. Respect should be based on who a person is, not what they have." Arlene nodded, looking at me appreciatively. "Dad's right, Tristan. That's what he's always taught me." Tristan looked puzzled. "But in our world, people respect success, and success is measured by achievement, recognition, status." "Who decided that?" I asked. "Who says that someone who has an expensive car is more successful than someone who has a happy family, or that someone who lives in a mansion is better than someone who helps others?" Tristan opened his mouth to object, but then closed it, unable to find an argument. "You know," I continued more gently, "I'm not judging your ambition to succeed. Ambition is a good thing, but if you measure your worth only by material achievements, you'll never be truly satisfied." Because there will always be someone richer, with a more expensive car and a bigger house, Arlene added quietly. Tristan looked at both of us with the expression of a man trying to solve a complex puzzle. But if it's not money or status, what makes a person successful? He asked with genuine curiosity. That's for everyone to decide for themselves, I answered. For me, success is creating something of value that benefits people. It is to see my daughter grow up to be a happy, confident person. It's going to sleep with a clear conscience knowing that I've lived the day with dignity. Tristan nodded thoughtfully, digesting my words. I could see that he was struggling with himself, with deep-seated ideas about values and success. I'm not saying you have to share my views, I added. Everyone chooses their own path. I just want you to understand that you can't judge a man by his cover. Arlene put her hand on Tristan's arm. Remember when I tried to explain this to you from the beginning? That Dad isn't what he seems? Tristan nodded, looking at his wife remorsefully. I remember, but I was too overconfident to listen. We finished dessert in a more relaxed atmosphere. Tristan even told a couple of funny stories from his childhood, showing a more human side than I'd seen so far. When it was time to pay, Tristan reached for his wallet, but I stopped him. My treat tonight, I said. But I insisted on this dinner, Tristan objected. And I insist on paying, I said softly but firmly. Consider it a gesture of goodwill. Tristan nodded reluctantly, but I saw something new in his eyes, a respect that had nothing to do with my financial situation. As we left the restaurant, I suggested, Arlene, how about I give you a ride home? We could talk for a while. My daughter looked at her husband as if asking for permission. Sure, Tristan said after a short pause. I still have things to do at the office. I'll pick up the paperwork and come back later. Arlene looked surprised at his understanding, but nodded. Good. I'll see you at home. Tristan awkwardly held out his hand to me. Thank you for, informative evening, Hayden. I shook his hand, sensing a breakthrough in our relationship. You're welcome, Tristan. I hope this isn't our last family dinner. When Tristan left for his car, Arlene and I headed to my pickup. I noticed that she was no longer embarrassed by the sight of him like she used to be. You know, she said as she got into the passenger seat, I've never seen Tristan look so confused. You've really turned his world upside down. I hope it's for the best, I replied, starting the engine. I think so, Arlene nodded. He needed that shock. He'd gotten too caught up in the trappings of success, forgetting the real values. We pulled out of the parking lot and headed toward Arlene and Tristan's house, a large, modern building in an upscale neighborhood. You've always known about my business, I said. Not a question, but a statement. Of course, Arlene smiled. I grew up watching you build it from the ground up. Why do you think I chose finance as my major in college? I looked at my daughter in surprise. You never said you were inspired by my example. Because you already knew that, she replied softly. Dad, you showed me that you can succeed by being true to yourself, by staying true to your principles. That's more important than any money. I felt a lump come up in my throat. Despite all my accomplishments in business, Arlene had always been my greatest pride. And why did you marry Tristan? I asked cautiously. He seemed to represent very different values. Arlene sighed. He wasn't always like that. When we first met, he was ambitious, yes, but also kind, considerate, with big dreams. Then he got promoted, started making more money, and something changed. He became obsessed with the outward signs of success. People change, I observed. But not completely, Arlene countered. Somewhere deep inside, he's still the Tristan I fell in love with. I see glimpses of that man from time to time. Maybe tonight will help him find his way back to his true self. I nodded, hoping she was right. We drove a few more blocks in comfortable silence. You know, I finally said, maybe I should have told Tristan about my business sooner, saved you both this awkwardness. Arlene shook her head. No, Dad. Then he would have respected you for the money, not for who you are. He needed to get over that lesson. Wise beyond your years, I smiled. I have a good teacher, Arlene replied, squeezing my hand. When we pulled up to their house, I noticed that the lights in the windows weren't on. Tristan wasn't back yet. Are you sure you'll be okay on your own? I asked. Of course I am, Daddy. I'm not a little girl anymore, Arlene laughed. She leaned over and kissed me on the cheek. Thank you for tonight, and for everything you've taught me. You're welcome, sweetheart, I replied, feeling the warmth in my chest. I waited until Arlene came in the house and turned on the lights before I drove away. All the way home, I thought about Tristan, about his reaction to discovering my secret, about his struggle with his own prejudices. Perhaps there was more depth to him than I'd realized. Perhaps he truly loved my daughter and wanted the best for her. It was just that his ideas of best were skewed. I hoped this evening would give him food for thought, make him rethink his views on success, values, and what really matters in life. After parking the pickup at my house, I sat in the dark for a while, thinking about what Tristan had said at the restaurant. If it's not money or status, what makes a person successful? It was a good question, and maybe by seeking an answer to it, Tristan could become a better version of himself, for Arlene and for himself. It was 3 days after our memorable dinner at the Azure. I hadn't called Arlene, giving her and Tristan time to digest what had happened. It wasn't until last night that she called me herself to tell me everything was okay, but Tristan was very pensive and silent. Well, that wasn't surprising. Wednesday morning was sunny. I was going over the financial reports for the new restaurant in Memphis when there was a knock on my office door. Come in, I said, not taking my eyes off the numbers. Mr. Priest. Dorothy's voice sounded unusually formal. You have a visitor. Mr. Murphy. I looked up and saw Tristan behind Dorothy's back. He looked unaccustomedly insecure in his strict business suit. Tristan. I stepped up to meet him. What a surprise. Am I interrupting? He asked, looking around my office with undisguised interest. No, of course not. Come in. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Dorothy, bring us some coffee, please. When the door closed behind the receptionist, Tristan squirmed uncomfortably in his chair. So, this is your office, he said, looking at the simple interior. I had envisioned it differently. Disappointed? I asked with a slight smile. No, just... For a man of your stature, the office is very modest. What do you think I need? A marble desk? Gold pens? I grinned, but without malice. Tristan blushed slightly. That's not what I meant. It's just that successful businessmen usually like to show off their success. Maybe it's because they're not sure of it, I said. I don't need to prove anything to anyone, especially with expensive furniture. Dorothy brought coffee, black for me, cappuccino for Tristan, though he didn't say which one he preferred. My secretary was always observant. So, I said when we were alone, to what do I owe this visit? Tristan took a sip of coffee as if gathering his thoughts. I came to apologize, he said finally, for the way I've been acting around you all this time, especially at the restaurant. I set aside the pen I'd been playing with and looked at my son-in-law carefully. I accept your apology, I nodded, though I had to admit the look on your face when Willard called me boss was worth it. Tristan smiled slightly but quickly turned serious. It's not just that. After that night, I thought a lot about what you said. That respect should be based on who a man is, not what he has. And what conclusions have you come to? I asked, genuinely interested. Tristan sighed. My whole life had been built on the idea that success was measured by money and status. My father was a bank manager, and he always told me, Tristan, in this world only those who can afford the best are respected. I grew up with that belief. And you never doubted it? I asked softly. No, because it worked, Tristan answered honestly. The better I dressed, The more expensive my car was, the more respect I got. At least that's how it seemed to me. I nodded, understanding his logic. The world really does often work by such rules. And then I met you, Tristan continued. A man who, with millions, drives an old pickup truck and doesn't see a problem with it. Who doesn't think it's necessary to mention his business when you meet him. Who seems completely comfortable in his own skin without any of the trappings of success. And has that shattered your picture of the world? I suggested. Completely, Tristan admitted with a nervous chuckle. I couldn't understand how it was possible. Why would you give up the privileges that money gives you? I don't give up privileges, I clarified. I just choose the ones that really matter to me. The freedom to do what I love, the opportunity to help others, time with loved ones. Tristan nodded thoughtfully. You know, after that dinner, I couldn't sleep. I've been rethinking everything. Yesterday, I even gave up on buying a new car, even though I almost made a deal. You did? I raised my eyebrows. Yeah. He looked a little embarrassed. I realized that I was buying it not because I needed it, but because I wanted to impress my colleagues, and it seemed empty. I hid a smile as I watched the young man struggle with himself. Don't get me wrong, he added quickly. I'm not going to give up comfort or nice things. It's just, now I'm thinking about the reasons why I want them. That's a good start, I approved. Tristan took another sip of coffee, then set the cup firmly on the table. There's something else, he said. I wasn't just unfair to you because of my preconceptions about success. There was also jealousy. Jealousy? I wondered. Of your relationship with Arlene, Tristan admitted. She always talks about you with such admiration. Daddy taught me that. Daddy always said that. Sometimes I felt inadequate compared to you. I didn't expect such candor and I was touched. Tristan, Arlene loves you, I said seriously. She chose you to be her life partner. Just because she respects her father doesn't diminish her feelings for you. I realize that now, he nodded. But there was a time when I thought I had to prove to her that I was more successful than you, show her that she made the right choice. And that's why you tried so hard to emphasize my unsuccessfulness? I guessed. Tristan lowered his eyes. Yes, it was petty and undignified. I apologized. I looked at my brother-in-law with a new understanding. For the first time, I saw him not just as a smug upstart, but as a man with doubts, fears, and his own struggles. You know, I said after a pause, it took me 65 years to realize some things. You're on the right track and you're only 32. Tristan looked up, his eyes wide with gratitude. The truth is, I continued, I've been unfair to you too. I judged you by your suit and your car, just like you judged me by my pickup truck. We were both wrong. Maybe, Tristan agreed with a slight smile. But your judgment of me was closer to the truth than mine was of you. I laughed. Don't be too hard on yourself. We all make mistakes. It's important to learn from them. We finished our coffee and the conversation turned to lighter topics. Business, sports, future plans. I noticed that Tristan was really smart and observant when he wasn't trying to impress or prove his superiority. You know, I said as our conversation came to an end, I'd like to invite you and Arlene to dinner this Saturday, at my house. Tristan looked surprised. Are you sure? After the way I've been acting, it's in the past, I said. We'll start fresh. Then we'd love to come. Tristan nodded. Can I bring anything? Just good cheer, I smiled. And maybe a bottle of that red wine you ordered at the restaurant. It wasn't bad. Tristan looked genuinely pleased. It was a deal. As he was about to leave, I remembered something else. By the way, how's your project at the office? Arlene mentioned you were having some difficulties. Tristan froze in the doorway, his shoulders slightly tense. Did she tell you about it? Only that you were worried. No details. Tristan sighed. Yes, There are concerns. The investment portfolio I manage is not showing the expected returns. If the situation doesn't change, I could lose important clients. Do you want to talk about it? I suggested it. I'm not an expert in finance, but I have experience in solving business problems. Tristan hesitated for only a second. Actually, I'd really appreciate the advice. Then sit down. I pointed to the chair. I have another hour before my next meeting. We spent the next 45 minutes discussing Tristan's problems with the investment portfolio. I was impressed with his knowledge and analytical skills, but I noticed that he was too fixated on short-term results, neglecting long-term strategy. When I pointed this out, he was skeptical at first, but then began to see the logic in my arguments. "You know," he said, gathering up his papers, "I've never looked at the situation from that angle. I think your approach might work. Let me know if you need any more help," I offered. "And don't forget Saturday night dinner." "I will," Tristan nodded. Thank you for everything." After he left, I sat for a long time thinking about our conversation. Maybe there really was more depth to Tristan than I'd realized. He was young, ambitious, and a little misguided about what was really important in life, but he had a desire to learn and change. And that's no small thing. Saturday night came faster than I expected. I decided to cook dinner myself. After all, I had started my career as a chef and still loved to cook. The menu was simple but delicious. Grilled steak and vegetables, baked potatoes, and apple pie for dessert, Eleanor's recipe, which had always been Arlene's favorite. I cleaned up the house myself too, although I usually had a cleaning lady come once a week. There was something satisfying about getting the house ready for my family with my own hands. At 6 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. Arlene and Tristan stood on the doorstep, both with smiles. My daughter held a bouquet of wildflowers, and Tristan held a bottle of promised wine in a box. "Daddy!" Arlene hugged me. "It smells so good." "I hope you're hungry," I said as I let them in. "I'm starving," Arlene admitted. Tristan and I had been tearing down the garage all day, and I hadn't had time to eat. I looked at my son-in-law in surprise. Somehow I couldn't imagine him doing such a mundane job. "What?" Tristan noticed my gaze. "Did you think I couldn't work with my hands?" "I admit, the thought crossed my mind," I said honestly. "I didn't grow up in as wealthy a family as you might think," Tristan explained. "My father worked hard to give us the best, but he also taught me that some things a man should be able to do on his own." I nodded, appreciating his candor. "By the way, this is for you." He handed me the box he was holding. "A small token of appreciation for your advice on my investment portfolio. It really helped." I opened the box and saw inside a beautiful handmade leather diary. "I noticed that you use a notebook," Tristan explained. "I thought you might like this one. It was made by a local craftsman." "Thank you," I said sincerely, appreciating the gift. Very practical and tasteful. We went into the kitchen where I was finishing the last of the preparations. Arlene volunteered to help with the serving, and Tristan opened the wine to let it breathe. "How long has it been since you've been here, Dad?" Arlene asked, setting the plates down. I wondered. "Probably about 2 months, since your housewarming." "That's too long," she shook her head. "We should see each other more often." "I couldn't agree more," Tristan said unexpectedly. "Why don't we make these family dinners a regular occurrence, once every 2 weeks, at everyone's place?" I was pleasantly surprised by that suggestion. "I'd like that," I nodded. As we sat down at the table, I noticed Arlene watching Tristan and me furtively, as if expecting the tension to return. But her fears were not realized. The conversation flowed easily and casually. Tristan talked about his work, how he'd used my advice, and how it had helped him see the situation in a new light. "Did you know that your father is a business strategy genius?" he asked Arlene. "Of course I do," she smiled. "Why do you think I chose finance as my major? I wanted to be like him." "You never told me that," I was touched by her words. Because you already knew that, Dad, Arlene replied softly. After dinner, we moved into the living room with glasses of wine. The conversation turned to more personal topics, Arlene's childhood, my memories of her mother, even Tristan's youth. You know, he said at one point, when I was a teenager, I dreamed of being a musician, played guitar, even wrote songs. Really? Arlene was surprised. You never told me. Because it was stupid, Tristan shrugged. My father quickly explained to me that music was a hobby, not a profession for a serious man. So you quit? I asked. Yeah, in college. Focused on finance, just like my father had planned. It's a shame, I said sincerely. The world may have lost a good musician. Or gained a mediocre financier, Tristan said ironically. I wouldn't say that, I countered. From what I've seen, you're a very capable analyst. You're just perhaps too focused on short-term results. Tristan nodded thoughtfully. You know, after our conversation in your office, I've been rethinking a lot of things. Not just about work, but about life in general. I realized that I had always chased after quick results, immediate recognition. I never thought about the long term. That's normal at your age, I remarked. Youth is impatient. Maybe, Tristan agreed. But I'm beginning to realize the value of your approach. Building something solid that will stand the test of time, even if it means less glitz and bluster now. I looked at my son-in-law with growing respect. Perhaps there really was more depth to him than I had originally realized. It's always been obvious to me, I said. But everyone has to come to that realization in his own way.